Good evening, everybody, to another fantastic episode of NBS. We have a packed house tonight with some really cool guests, so I'm really excited to get started and introduce them. So go ahead, guys. Let everybody know who you are.
I am Fiji Grande, currently serving as WA Delegate of the North Pacific.
I am Bobberino. I am
SillyString. I am your king.
Grande and his Minister of Defense in TNP. I'm also an outreach officer currently in the Rejected Realm.
I'm Church of Satan, a longtime member of the Rejected Realm. I don't have an office right now, but I'm the longest serving, or consecutively serving officer of the region, so there's my fancy title.
I'm MadJack, and I'm unemployed in NS and in real life.
Well, that about sums it up. So I'm Ghost, I'm Mr. of Communications, and the host of this show. We are going to start with one of the most interesting things to happen in nation states in a little while, the attempt to condemn the land of kings and emperors. A lot of people have opinions on this, and I think even in this room, people have very different opinions of it. So it was not a successful vote, though only because last-minute revelations came out that forced all of the big regions who had been supporting it to decide to change their mind and help kill it. Our region, the North Pacific, initially voted for based on the forum vote, but we did end up voting against it. We definitely had some reasons for that, but I'm just curious what your initial takeaway was on the resolution as it was presented, and then after we found out additional information, how you felt about that.
Well, I didn't need to fact check everything. I skimmed through it. I've been fighting against LKE for years, so I know that they've earned it. I know a lot of it was true. The Rejected Realms was in favor of it.
It's one of those where I'd really like to see someone come back to it and write a resolution without the issues that this one had. I think it was Clause 12, that was a really big issue, and also just the actions of the author in general were pretty appalling, but knowing who that is, I'm unsurprised.
When you say Clause 12, what was in Clause 12 for people who maybe weren't paying as close attention to that?
I believe Clause 12 said that LKE had broken
The recruitment one?
Yeah, I think they'd broken recruitment scripting rules,
and then
used the person who did actually break the rules as a scapegoat for them.
I mean, for me, that pretty much killed it. I don't really care if LKE gets condemned or not. I'm just not that invested in it. But bringing in the rule-breaking issue when it's absolutely false and an out-of-game concern, I think is really problematic.
LKE didn't really help themselves, though, with their vote against TG campaign. I was just amused at them claiming that Ondor and LKE... Well, that LKE didn't know that they were going to invade the Rejected Realms when Ondor was point in Belgium.
Yeah, that was some Ivan-level duality crap.
And then we had a turn when the vote was almost over, and it was clear it was going to pass, with the author being the source of the controversy. What were your thoughts on that?
Anyone who goes to the lengths to fake screenshots and that sort of thing is an issue going forward.
The author's defense, such as it is, my understanding is that they are claiming that they were given those screenshots, did not vet them for truth, but did not actively fake them or seek out fakes themselves, which is still not a great defense, because if you're being given screenshots, it's kind of on you to make sure that they're real, or at least not obviously fake, but it's a little bit better than outright making them up yourself.
Didn't the author also say that the whole thing was an experiment to see how much he could get away with, and we were letting him get away with a lot? It kind of suggested he was taking credit for the screenshot thing, too, in that case.
I don't know. People will say all kinds of crap to save face, really.
It's just a prank, bro. That's what it was. It was the NS equivalent. Sorry to speak over Fiji, but it was, yeah.
WA. It's just...
I still cannot hear Bob.
It's just everyday nation states.
I hear literally everyone else, and I cannot hear a thing Bob's saying. It just lights up as if he's trying to speak.
I guess just don't speak when Bob's thing lights up then.
Bob, don't talk to SillyString directly. She won't hear what you're saying.
SillyString, you're a burly Polish man. I'm scared of you.
I take Ghost's impression of what Consular did, basically passing it off as a prank, felt exceedingly disingenuous and seemed to be taking credit for the screenshots. So I feel like his story has changed 2 or 3 times now.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be all that surprised if someone now comes forward, hopefully not immediately thereafter, with a condemnation of Consular himself.
someone, like everybody was coming out of the woodwork to do that.
And it's really just a shame, too, because I agree with what the Church of Satan said earlier, that being that I believe that LKE totally deserves the condemnation. And as a longtime defender myself, like I have firsthand experience with that and know that they definitely deserve that. To some extent, I feel like I have a lot of apologies to give, especially for how I was able to sort of dismiss and overlook what was said in Clause 12. But ultimately, I sort of failed to see how anyone was surprised based on how I do have sort of that defender history.
Well, I wasn't planning on going into criticizing your work in this vote, but I think there's a few other things in how that played out that was more of a problem than you being a defender, to be fair.
Sure. It just feels odd to overlook it instead of, addressing it.
But hey, at least Ren's back.
Kinda.
Back. He's never left. Supposedly retired, but come on. We all know he's not really gone.
Lurks.
I didn't say that one.
Yeah, Renaissancer never really left. I think there's probably times when he's been less active, but everyone's activity, comes and goes from time to time.
His activity always comes during an election or when something like this is at vote in the World Assembly.
Zaya.
It's clearly all for political
What are
gain.
you saying?
What, that a player is interested in certain parts of the game and comes out to talk about it when that stuff comes up? I don't think that's really shocking or even, a bad thing necessarily. I'm just saying that I don't think anybody is ever truly retired from this game, even if they, say they are and try to be.
Once you're here, you're always here.
Even if the whole thing about it being a joke was the first excuse, I wouldn't have believed it, because that's just a poor excuse, if anything.
I agree with that. I think it's sort of exceedingly poor as an excuse. I think it's, as I said earlier, disingenuous. And I think he has every right to be very hard criticized.
This is going to be like a dumb basic question, but who even is it Consular who wrote this? I don't know anything about them. Do they have any actual history as a serious WA author?
Not as a WA author, but they were in Albion and have been, or were, sort of imperialist aligned. But when Albion sort of split off from NS / split off from the imperialist sphere, he was a large part of several issues.
And caused them?
Was involved at the very least. I'm not sure exactly to his extent of how much he caused them. Do you remember when several WFEs were changed to sort of mock LKE?
Nope.
It
I don't pay attention to anything outside of PvP too much.
It was a thing that happened. Was basically, I think it was Consular and it was a few others, but that was one of the issues.
I don't think a lot of people share this opinion, but I had a problem with the resolution just the way it was crafted, and clearly the author had an axe to grind and was using very aggressive, disrespectful language, and I just felt like that was a bit much. Even, without Clause 12, I think a decent condemnation could have been written by someone who was less of a douche, I guess I'm going to say.
Yeah.
I will say I agree with that. It was sort of poorly written in that sense, and there were definitely aspects of it where, I feel like it crossed a certain line. But I will say two things. Firstly, it is a condemnation. There's a reason why they're upset with, the region or nation that's been targeted. And secondly, I tend to, and I know this is going to be a controversial opinion, but I tend to not overlook, that's too strong of a word, but sort of take with a grain of salt stuff that's written poorly in favor of what I see as a deserving target of the condemnation. Now, of course, there could always be like a better resolution that comes along, but you sometimes have to wait months or years for that to occur. And so I typically just sort of go at the moment,
I feel like it doesn't matter how much time passes, you will always find people eager to condemn LKE, so I think you can actually have some patience to get a better written resolution, and that sounds a lot like ends justifying the means, which I kind of have a problem with.
I'd like to respond to Fiji's kind of approach argue with a little bit. My approach is pretty much the opposite. if someone really deserves a condemnation, I think going for a poorly written one, and especially, I mean, in this case, this is kind of egregiously bad. But in general, going for one that isn't well written and isn't like researched and all of that makes it A, more likely that the condemnation is going to be voted down, and B, more likely that if it passes, it'll be overturned in the future once the initial fervor against that region has kind of passed. Region or person has passed, and people are like, oh well, I mean, this is actually really bad, and they don't deserve to have this like false statement or whatever about them out there. And I find that condemnations who are not so personally invested in the outcome, so that they can actually write a good condemnation and make sure it'll stick, I think those tend to be stronger condemnations overall. And I mean, I'm also kind of a pedant, so I will always vote against a resolution that is full of, errors.
I think that's a fair point. I also think tone doesn't so much matter in resolutions. Generally, condemnations come under two types, I'd say. One's written against, they're written for people rather than against.
Yeah.
So, like, crushing our enemies would have a condemnation written for them because of the work they've done to the game, but you can't justify their icy actions, in a commendation sense. I think you could probably write an LKE condemnation on, like, both for them and against them.
And that kind of goes to an underlying question of what condemnations are for. Are they to reward people for playing bad guys, or are they for punishing people for being actual assholes? I mean, I'm going to distinguish between roleplay and gameplay condemnations, because I think in general roleplay condemnations tend to be pretty consistently, rewarding people for playing the bad guy well.
I think when it comes to roleplay condemnations, completely understand that that's fine. As it applies to in-character, in-game sort of considerations, I tend to lean very favorably towards these sort of condemnations as being of a much more serious nature.
No, it's not. To me, there's no easy answer, simply because there are people who are going to seek out the condemned regions or individuals and be edgy about it. But also because, I mean, nation states does sometimes have some really good villains. Like MadJack said, crushing our enemies, and Jacker and Maul, they're really good raiders, and they're really cool, but they're also like decent about it, if that makes sense. And so their condemnations really are like recognizing the contributions they have made to the game, playing everybody's enemies.
So here's the thing about that, right? Knowing COE, knowing Jacker, having, interacted with Maul, I actually completely agree with you. And I don't universally believe that raiders should just be condemned for their actions. I would actually say that people like COE and Jacker and Maul, who have basically excelled at what they do, I would honestly be somewhat supportive of a commendation rather than a condemnation.
Oh man, if I tell Maul you want to commend him, he is going to flip a shit.
Well, maybe not Maul, because Maul keeps doing his joke campaigns.
What you're describing, a condemnation of such people, is actually a commendation. It's just it's doing it in character. So in that case, condemning them, you're really commending them in character. So
and we have both types on the books. I mean, as long as we've had them, it's been used for kind of both versions of what condemn is. And so I think you run into that with something like LKE as well, because there's some people who really think that they should be genuinely condemned for being bad, and that nobody should be liking them or supporting them and all that. And then there's people who think, okay, but I mean, they played the game in a legitimate way, and we should be recognizing them for what they did, but obviously it was, as bad guys, and so it should be a condemnation. And so I think wires get crossed in a sense, because we had this condemnation, which is very clearly, I forget who said, from someone who had an axe to grind. But that
was me. I said that.
It definitely was someone who had an axe to grind. I mean, for example, someone like Fiji, who thinks, the LKE does deserve to be condemned, but I don't think Fiji has a personal axe against LKE, though feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. So I think it's hard sometimes with this type of condemnation to get any sort of consensus about what you're trying to do, and that can lead to confused resolutions.
I think the fact that they don't want the condemnation actually reinforces why they should have it. Mm. Because they've always seen themselves in a
not actually evil light.
Yeah, and I guess I'm just going to say it. It's kind of delusional, but they actually believe that they were right, which you can't fault them for that. But But they did still do bad things.
Well, depends how you define it.
I guess the weird way I was phrasing it is basically a weird way of stating my agreement with you, SillyString.
I'm always okay with being agreed with.
Well, that's good. That's a good positive note, I think, to end the topic on. I think in a way we're all kind of in agreement then that the end result of what happened was the right ending to this process, and that some of us are looking for a better resolution without any of the obvious over the top, crossing the lines aspects. And
So glad that this all came out before the end of the vote and not after the end of the vote.
well, if it did, I think there would have been an easy argument for a repeal. And then, of course, you have to worry about voter fatigue, because then you're going to have 2 more votes on the same thing, and that always kind of increases the odds that subsequent votes will fail. Okay, so with that, I'm going to slide on over to the next topic. I don't know how long this will go, but I'm just curious because, this is an NBS news show. We do kind of want to be a little newsy. There was some events happening over in the UCR side of things with Pacifica. First of all, does anybody here know what the deal is with Pacifica? Like, what happened there recently?
Is that the one Topid abandoned as soon as he got St. Abaddon back?
Or was it the not getting rid of the Antifa policy that they had?
Maybe all of the above. Like, I was actually thinking of there was kind of a power vacuum in the region. They were going to have elections, and there were 4 people who signed up to run for the election, and no one else did. And after a day, they just declared them the winners. And then there was a controversy with the fact that it wasn't a democratic election. Long story short, Cormac is now once again the delegate of Pacifica after basically shaming the guys who were in charge into submission. It was about a week ago now, I think. I take it nobody really has any opinions on this because nobody really knows what I'm talking about.
So it sounds like Osiris all over again.
Well, I thought that Cormac didn't want anything to do with Pacifica anymore because they strayed away from their original goal or whatever.
Yeah, but then 12 hours passed.
I don't know. I remember he left. I didn't know why.
Well,
I feel bad for Cormac with regards to Pacifica because he spent better part of 30 hours making them a forum. And then I believe he accidentally deleted it.
I heard about that.
Which is always horrible. Like as someone who has spent a fair amount of time in the back end of Zenforo.
But he played a big part in Pacifica too, from like the beginning.
Yeah, he was their delegate for a while, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, he was.
He was pretty much their mouthpiece for a while.
Well, somebody had to after Topid abandoned it.
It's my understanding that Cormac is planning on holding the delegacy until Topid returns, which could be years from now. Yeah, so he might be stuck there for a while.
God, I'll be DOS again by that point.
Oh, let's hope not. Game is a more exciting place when MadJack is playing it.
I mean, I originally thought that Pacifica was just going to pet her out and give up, and now that they're now that they're at this point, I'm a little surprised that they're still going. And I'm willing to admit that I might have been wrong.
Well, the recent events almost kind of ruined it, but we'll see. Cormac's back, and maybe it'll.
Well, they've had some drama before, people up and leaving and stuff like that in recent months. Obviously, this is a little bit different because of what happened. So it'll be interesting to see if they can pick themselves back up. The game's more interesting with more, active UCRs in. Hopefully they can keep themselves going.
Oh, I'll say this. When Cormac is committed to something, he has a fair amount of drive to get it done. So, I mean, if he's sticking with Pacifica for now, I think that they're going to have a decent shot at it.
And what do you guys think of what this kind of means for the security of regions in general, of this Discord drama? This isn't the first region that's kind of run into this problem, and we kind of see every once in a while, like, for example, Block will come into this server and just start ping spamming until he gets banned, and that kind of thing just kind of happens. A lot of the OOC drama in recent years was because of things people were doing with Discord. Do you think maybe the platform itself is flawed and kind of creates a lot of these conflicts and issues?
We should all go back to IRC immediately.
Well, I knew you would say that, but personally I think that Discord's a superior platform and it actually brought a lot of life to regions, but I guess there's kind of a trade-off with that. So in general, what do you guys think of that?
No platform is perfect, and I do like IRC better, but because I feel like Discord draws activity from forums, but I don't think any region will have to worry as much about security of their server as much as the issue makes it sound like they should be.
For me, I think it has to do more with the platform of Discord itself. Discord is great, but one of the major flaws with Discord is that it's really hard to have a moderator on at all times. TNP does a really good job of having a moderation team or that has some representative on at some point in time, almost all the time. But a lot of regions don't have an experienced moderation team or an active moderation team able to counter those kinds of threats. And I think that's more a function of Discord that you can't really get IP'd. They really can't get IP banned.
If I'm not mistaken, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. When a Discord bans someone, or when you ban someone on Discord, it's not just the username; it actually does the IP address too.
No, but that's just that one account. If Bobberino, if this account got banned from TNP, I can easily log on to one of my alts and rejoin this server, especially because the invite is public. Speaking of which, I actually do have an alt in this server.
Always knew Mouth was your alt.
It explains everything, doesn't it?
Yep.
I wouldn't put ping spam very high up on the list of priorities as far as server security goes. It's annoying, yeah, but I wouldn't say it's a serious issue. The Rejected Realm server gets the same one person once in a while, a couple of times in one day, and it's really annoying, but it doesn't drive anybody away from the server. It just annoys everybody for a minute or two.
Well, yeah, I agree with that. It was just kind of an example of one thing that you kind of didn't have to deal with other platforms that Discord kind of makes it easier, because you can have the same person get banned a million times and keep coming back. And I know it's minor nuisances like that, but you know it's a greater variety of potential harm, however small it is. That's kind of where I was going with that.
Another thing I want to add is, as everyone knows, I can't hear what Bob's saying. I don't know if Bob touched on this at all. I'm sorry if I'm repeating ground that may have already been covered. But I feel like the Discord staff that I've ever had to interact with give two shits about stopping this sort of thing from happening on servers, as long as it doesn't become too much of a debacle. Whereas when we were on IRC, we had issues with someone ban evading. All we had to do was notify the Esper cops, and they would deal with it pretty dang quickly. I mean, they weren't perfect themselves, but it was less. I felt like we were less on our own in terms of dealing with this sort of enforcement. Whereas right now, like, if we reported something to Discord, they'd be like, okay.
That's the reaction I got from a lot of servers over the past couple of months have been getting ping spammed by some guy named Candlestick, and every time I've reported them, they pretty much just shrug it off.
Yeah, I was talking about him too. That's block.
Oh,
we actually had an even worse situation come up, and I'm not gonna include any details, but we had to report to the Discord staff somebody who was reported to have shared illegal content, and it was content that we could not legally or ethically confirm existed, but we had reports of it. So we had to tell the Discord staff, look, we've heard this person is doing this in private message. We don't have copies of the messages. We're not going to get copies of the messages, but this is their user ID. Please look into it. And all we got back, as I recall, was, do you have the message ID?
Yeah, can confirm that's what happened.
That's literally the only response I've ever got from the Discord staff.
And I mean, our response to that was like, no, we don't have the message ID. But by the way, if the FBI finds out about this and you guys are hosting on your servers, you're going to be in some pretty deep fucking shit. And we never heard anything else back. Versus, like, I'm pretty sure if we had gone to the Esper cops and been like, hey, this person is coming into our IRC channel and posting, like, porn or whatever, they would have dealt with it, like, quickly.
It's the difference between a business and, like, not a business,
Yeah.
which is what Esper generally was.
Yeah.
Discord is more focused about making money and being a platform for gaming and, you know, getting Tencent their investment back. And that, I think, might be one of the issues for Discord going forward, because it's partially owned by a company that is owned by the Chinese government. So enjoy that with all the Huawei stuff as well.
Do note that that when you turn developer mode on, that it allows you to copy the message ID of any message and the user ID of any user. And if Discord asks for those, it's really, really easy to get to that.
Yeah,
Right,
and
but
if you do,
the thing is, we couldn't get those messages because they'd been deleted
Illegal.
in a lot of cases, and in other cases, if they hadn't been deleted, if we'd have physically we'd have been breaking US law or UK law or the laws of various countries because of the nature of the content.
well, and even if you do get the message ID, after that they just shut up completely. They don't tell you they don't say they're going to do anything. They don't say they have done anything. They don't go into detail about where you should go about it or anything.
Okay, so if that's true, I'm not saying it's not true. I'm just using
Understood.
boring transition terminology here.
If that's the case, then
Considering that everything you just said, Discord's got some issues. Let's say hypothetically in the very near future, it completely collapses because of stuff like this. I'm not saying I think that's likely, but where do we go from there? What's the better alternative? I don't think going back to IRC is an option. Sorry, SillyString.
There isn't a better alternative.
yeah.
There isn't a platform that combines Discord's text stuff with their voice stuff. There isn't a platform. I've spent last week after I learned that Tencent was involved in Discord. I looked at some of the alternatives.
Slack? I've heard
I
of
was just about
Slack.
to mention Slack. Yeah,
Slack is more for like business stuff.
There used to be. They're not up now, but so I guess it's not really. It's not a viable option anymore. But Xfire was a great would have been a great alternative.
I think in the short term, if Discord went down all of a sudden, like we lost the forum all of a sudden, I think IRC could be an intermediate thing because we used it for years and it was totally fine. It would be an adjustment because IRC had a single channel. It was pound TNP and that was it. And then, every so often there were other channels, but in general, it was all one. So it wasn't the same as everything is now, but I think we could survive.
Well, yeah. It would have been an easy transition for a lot of us, but a lot of the newer players would have had trouble adjusting because there aren't as many shortcuts. You actually have to type out the commands for what you want to do, and you got to remember them.
Yeah, but that's part of the fun.
Yeah, but players like Marilyn Manson freaks, they weren't around for IRC. They didn't use it, so they have
That's about 80% of our user base.
I barely used it and I hated it.
I joined in 20. I had no idea
it
what
had its
IRC
drawbacks,
was
but it had its good sides too.
Before the various
But
conversations,
I think we would survive with some sort of alternative. Discord is not going to last forever, even if it doesn't just collapse. Someone's going to come up with a better platform. A question of making sure that we're elves until then, I suppose. Actively looking for alternatives, possibly.
Sorry, Bob, you were saying?
Sorry.
Before I joined in 2018, I honestly had absolutely no idea what IRC was before I had various conversations with Quiet Dad and a bunch of other old folks about what it was. Yes, all of you are old. Change my mind.
Are we old or are you just offensively young?
Both.
Can be.
I'm old enough to remember IRC. It could work. SillyString was right about.
It could also have benefits. I think if we were forced to go back to IRC for a little bit, I think it would revitalize the forum because you just can't do all of the things that people are using Discord for. It's not built for that.
Yeah, that would be the major benefit if we stepped away from Discord. Maybe there's things that we can still do whilst we have Discord to get people onto the forum, but I think people are entirely comfortable on Discord, so it would need something major to shift that activity back to the forum.
So it sounds like it's a big unknown, and we just have to hope that the next big thing comes along if this thing dies, and that we're happy with it. And in the meantime, we might have to go retro until that happens.
Yeah, but it's very unlikely that Discord is going anywhere. What with the money behind it, the money that they bring in, and everything like that. It's not going to be like a thing where a Facebook or someone will come along where they'll buy it and then 6 months later they'll shut it down.
Well, I'm anticipating it'll be more of a people will turn against it more, and we're going to start having questions in our communities. Maybe we want to consider using something else, and there might be some more tension there. That's kind of what I think is more likely than Discord just going kaput one day.
I was going to bring that up. I mean, at some point we may have to take a serious look at it. I mean, depending, it's probably some incident's going to happen, and we're going to be like, all right, does it even make sense for us to keep using this platform because of XYZ problems?
I think it's highly unlikely that people are going to start abandoning Discord rather than wait for like Ghost said, the next thing to come along. So I think it's more likely people are going to transition to the better thing, rather than go back to what we were using before.
Maybe, but like to kind of make a comparison, and this is not a perfect comparison because let's be honest, Tapatalk is the worst. But I mean, we could have just allowed the transition from Zeta Boris to Tapatalk to take place and kind of crossed our fingers and hoped that eventually Tapatalk would be bought out by a company that's a little bit less terrible. But we decided that we couldn't in good conscience support Tapatalk and give them any of our money or any of our traffic. And so we actively sought out a better option and went somewhere else. And I could see that sort of thing happening with Discord if the entire admin staff were to become concerned about some ethical thing. Like, if I'm having trouble coming up with a good example, but if Discord moderation staff refused to take action against things that we couldn't deal with ourselves, that was putting our community at risk, for example, I could see us deciding that we are not willing to sponsor the official and unofficial Discord anymore and find another option.
Yeah, but the thing with Tapatalk wasn't an ethical thing. It was an operational problem because it was all the basic stuff that we get on and essential stuff that we got on Zeta boards was something that we would have had to buy on Tapatalk.
Yeah, that was definitely part of it. But it was an ethical consideration too, and that's actually why we have deleted all of our old content from Tapatalk, because they have a number of issues, and I still need to go back and delete all old user accounts as well to keep user data from falling into their hands, basically. So the functionality was part, but it was also concern about Tapatalk itself.
Well, yeah, the fight continues on the admin side, as some of us are well aware. That it's almost been a year, and we're still struggling with the aftermath of that whole thing. But I think I'm going to shift us into the next topic, which is also potentially controversial or potentially not, depending on... I think we might be on the same page on this, guys, but we'll find out. There's been recent news that Kaiserreich, the community there, is moving regions, and part of the reason they cited was our civil defense siren was apparently really annoying to them and causing them issues with their community, so they're kind of moving on from that. But we're not really going into that specifically so much as more of the idea of moving communities. You have a group that's notorious for some reason, blacklisted by a bunch of the community. Is it ever possible, first of all, to overcome that, to come back from it, to change? I know, like in an ideal world, we think that we would want people to get better and improve, but this is nation states. Is it possible for notorious players who were in the Nazi region, or a community that was so tainted by that association, is it possible for them to come back in the game, be forgiven and accepted and, rehabilitated? Do you guys even think that nation states has room for that?
5 years ago it did. Not now.
For something as extreme as Kaiserreich, I'm inclined to say no, but for something less controversial, considerably less, given it's Kaiserreich, then it is possible, but even so, it'd still definitely be really difficult.
I think the process matters almost as much as the outcome in something like this, by which I mean, if your region is crap, and people give you a lot of shit about how crap your region is, and you close it down, and you pick up, and you go somewhere else, and you all make new nations, and a new region name with no ties to the old one, and you make a whole new region, and you haven't done anything to fix the crap, you can't really be surprised, or you shouldn't really be surprised when everyone's like, hey, you guys are actually still pretty crap. I think for a region to kind of turn itself around, it would need to have people who are willing to their mistakes and apologize and demonstrate that they're trying to do better without changing their identities and hiding, because that's an easy out. And I think that's where a lot of the negative reactions come from, is like, you're just trying to get out of consequences for the things that you've done. You're not actually trying to get better.
I completely agree with SillyString on that one. I think that, like, as far as Kaiserreich is concerned, they can claim all they want that they've reformed and that they're, somehow a better region now, that they're moving and whatnot. But until I see actual evidence of that, until I see, as SillyString was saying, apologies for what they've done in the past and the way they've behaved, I don't see how they should even expect us to behave any differently towards them.
Yeah, and it's not something we can just immediately do. We need to give them time to see where they're going at the very least. And if there isn't a sign of any genuine change or admission of guilt, then nobody has a reason to give them any more than that.
I thought the issue with Kaiserreich was that they were saying that they weren't fascist anymore, despite probably still being fascist.
They've always claimed that they're not actually fascist, and we pointed out, hey, this is the things that we're seeing that make you go on our list, and they're like, that's not true.
Okay. I got slightly confused there, because it seemed like people were expecting apologies rather than just a change in stuff they allow.
With Kaiserreich specifically, I mean, kind of Ghost was saying that he wants this to be, that he was kind of broaching more of a generic region which has done stuff. But with Kaiserreich specifically, I think it seems to me, from what I've observed, that they are not seeing or understanding the reasons why they're on our radar, literally. And if they wanted to genuinely get off that, I would want to see them not, being defensive and trying to argue and all of that, but just listening to what we're telling them about what we're seeing that makes them appear on our list as fascists. And then either owning that or backing away from it, but not just shuddering and going somewhere else.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. If they still don't feel that they were doing something wrong, then they really don't deserve a second chance.
Mm. Or, I mean, if they think we're wrong, then they should go convince people that we're wrong. Like, they're allowed to argue with us, and they are frequently.
I mean, they are the same group. They just happen to be moving regions thanks to the civil defense siren.
Yeah,
honestly, nothing's changed about Kaiserreich, even if they do shift regions. They're still freaking Kaiserreich.
Yeah, it's them specifically. I wouldn't say they're going to be successful.
I would say in general, I do tend to be more allowing and forgiving of people and more willing to welcome them back and sort of be merciful to people like that. But at the same time, that's in general. Kaiserreich and what they've done in the past is sort of so extreme. I don't think that that's likely. But I think we've also been reasonable and laid out exactly what they sort of have to do to get there. But nonetheless, I don't think that's likely. I don't think they're likely to be forgiven for what they've done, because I don't think they're willing to understand or accept or even apologize for it.
Yeah, I mean, they're a very unique exception to the idea.
Well, my personal opinion on it is I don't think anyone's ever going to be able to believe them after all that time. If they do make this effort, they denounce what they did, they apologize, they, stop having anything to do with that kind of rhetoric and that kind of behavior, I still don't think people will ever trust them. So, and knowing the climate of this game the way it is now, I think they're doomed for all time. I think they would have to completely come back as strangers and never get caught as being those old players, and that's the only way they'd have a shot. But I think they're probably blacklisted forever. That's just where I'm landing on that.
There's a good chance of that. I mean, it takes a seriously long time to rebuild to like a standard level of trust of someone. And it takes commitment and it takes a lot of effort to get there. And so, yeah, like I kind of see what you're saying.
Yeah, but then if they're discovered, it kind of changes the reason why you might trust them now. It'd make it look like it was done under false pretenses.
Exactly. The more honest way of doing it would be, acknowledging that you were wrong in the past and then working to build back your reputation and to build back your trust, no matter how long that takes. Coming back as a new nation entirely, if you are discovered, as the Church of Satan mentioned, then you're outed. Then the alias is known, and people know that you didn't really make that effort, and they'll judge you for that.
Well, people really hate it when they do that, so you have the whole lying aspect. I wasn't saying, like, I think they should do that. I was saying that that's the only hope I think they ever have of overcoming their reputation at this point. And of course, when you're in that position, you really are screwed, because at some point you're going to get caught, and that's just going to make it worse.
I mean, your only chance is really to get away with it for long enough that when you are caught, you can point to your whatever, you 2 years history of good behavior and be like, okay, but you can see that we did better. But no one gets away with it for that long. Not really.
I don't even think if somebody made it 2 years without being outed as one of these former fascist players, I don't think they would survive it. No matter what the 2 years looked like, no matter how positive it was, I think they would still be ruined when it eventually comes out, because that's just how little patience we have for that kind of player in this day and age. And I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing.
I don't know. I mean, if it's an individual player, I think, I mean, if it's a whole region of people who are outed, that's different. But I mean, I think someone, I mean, take for example the teenager who starts playing, gets involved with say a fascist region, and then doesn't have the emotional maturity to kind of own up to that and things right, but does realize that they're kind of on a bad side. So gets rid of their old nation, makes a new nation, new identity, totally new, joins a totally new region, and plays as that nation. I think if it were to later come out that, they had this fascist nation, and at that point they were able to say, you're right, I sucked, I was a shitty person back then, and I didn't want any ties between that nation and who I really am, I think there could be some leniency for one person, not for a whole region.
I could definitely see that on like an individual level, but like across nation states, and from what I've seen from gameplay and whatnot, I kind of agree with Ghost that people probably won't be as forgiving.
I mean, I guess there's what gameplay will forgive, and then what I as a person am willing to forgive, which don't line up.
Speaking of gameplay, that's, I think, a great way to transition into what I see as the last topic here that we can discuss. Very recent-ish news coming out of the South Pacific. Glenn has posted a end-of-term address, I guess, as the Minister of Foreign Affairs, and has basically laid down the gauntlet for TSP to move into full Defender, which I'm sure doesn't surprise a lot of people, but at the same time is surprising that they would actually decide to go for it. There's actually a debate going on over there right now about whether or not they want to do this full Defender policy. And we have some long-term players here who have some very particular opinions about TSP, and I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on this latest news.
Just to update your information a little bit, they're actually debating a law that would make it so they would be Defender aligned officially.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to refer to. The thing that they're debating, the law, make it official.
To be honest, I'm surprised they're finally picking a side, as it were, because they've probably since before 2013, I wasn't there, around before then, they've been flip-flopping almost constantly, but the law specifically is like, it's revisionist kinda, because it says that they've operated in a way that promotes the rights of natives, but they've done a lot of raiding over the years too. So it's hard to honestly say that that's how they've operated.
So you're saying like there's an element of them basically saying that their past behavior was more Defender too, so they're just admitting that that's what they are, and you're saying that because they raided, technically that's not accurate. Am I understanding that?
Well, not that they've raided, but that they've raided a lot. They haven't just done the occasional raid. They've had the person in charge of their militaries a lot of times were actually raiders, and they focused primarily on raiding.
That's because that's where the activity is.
I mean, and then
I can say that by looking at LibCord, looking at their reports, and just checking out the content of who's there, there are very few SPSFers there, and there's very little. They're outside of a revival in the last rough week or so. The activity there was very sparse.
And the South Pacific hasn't been particularly relevant for years now. So more than anything, I think it's a shot at trying to take a side that's more active now than it might have been a few years ago, because there's more active defenders, I think, in the South Pacific now than there are active raiders in their military.
So it sounds like you don't think that they can authentically become a defender region then. It's like more like a political ploy and just the sign of changing times.
Definitely. I think also, even if they do pass this law, I think there's a solid chance that with the activity to their military that it could bring, it's more than likely inevitably go back to being independent like they've been for longer than I can remember.
I don't know. I always think of TSP as defender in all but name, basically. And their forays into being independent and doing things like raiding have always struck me more as trying to capitalize on the game than any sort of authentic expression of belief. I mean, TSP was defender when I started playing, and it has always seemed like whenever they do anything but being defender, it sits uneasily with a lot of their community. I don't think that this is an opportunistic move. Well, the law may be being proposed because Glenn sees an opportunity for it to pass, but I don't think he is being opportunistic with his expression of beliefs. He has absolutely been a defender for years, and I think if it were to pass, that would be due to deep-seated sympathies, because that makes it sound like a bad thing, and I'm a defender, but defender sentiments among the population.
Well, yeah, and that's to be expected because Glenn's always fought for the SPSF to be defender. This is the best chance he's ever had to secure that.
Did note the thing that really stood out to me when I was reading their debate thread was one of their people was warning that TNP refuses to work with defenders, and so they'd be alienating an ally if they did this, and I don't think that that's true.
No,
it's not true, and probably based on the fact that we don't work with the Grey Wardens.
Right, probably.
Which
the North Pacific's worked with defenders even recently. Even they worked with the Rejected Realms Army.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can confirm that. The NPA has done D-tags and stuff with the RRA.
Does anyone here actually think that Fiji would refuse to work with defenders?
Oh yeah, no, we'll totally work with defenders.
Well,
can I put forward a bold proposal for TMP?
Sure, why not?
We should do the same.
You're saying go full defender?
Yeah, why not?
So, explain your comments on my campaign thread then.
I at the time I didn't think it'd be the right move, but looking at the state of gameplay,
because
you
honestly,
have a choice.
Nothing would please me more than to do.
Well, you have a choice between you have a choice between like relevancy and shaking up the gameplay environment and just staying in the comfortable place we find ourselves in TMP.
Yeah, but should we do things just because we can shake things up and because the game is more interesting? Or?
Well, it depends on whether you think that GCRs, especially, and gameplay regions have a responsibility to keep gameplay healthy. I don't
think because the North Pacific going defender would shake things up as much as you're hyping it up to be.
I think if, say, the North Pacific went full defender and at the same time formed a new WA block with perhaps TRR and TSP instead of Wall.
Well, I mean that'd be a nice opening. What we talked about in the WA symposium not too long ago about what was it, like WA rating or something like that, or rating for the World Assembly.
Proposal blocking. Yeah,
that.
But that doesn't necessarily have anything to do with R&D, though.
It does, because in order to affect it, you have to raid to take their delegacies. You don't have to tag it. You just have to make sure that the delegates don't stay seated.
Yeah, but I mean, like, WA votes, usually, unless it's like a liberation, maybe, really doesn't have anything to do with that side of the game. That's more like talking about affecting outcomes. So, if we were a defender region, we probably wouldn't do that at all, because that would be, technically that would be raiding.
I think Church of Satan is saying it's a similar proposal, in that it'd be a sort of sea change in how people interact with the WA in gameplay.
I do think it would be a mistake for TNP to officially go defender. Sorry, Fiji. And I think a lot of that goes back to that we're not friendly with the Grey Wardens. We're not, as far as I know, terribly friendly with any other. I don't know if there are any other major defender groups. As I said, I mostly just pay attention to TNP. But I think that would be a pretty big impediment in terms of being effective as a defender region. We'd pretty much have to get along with the Grey Wardens, and let's be honest, that would mean us forgetting about whatever the problem with them was way back when, and them ever.
No offense taken. I completely understand your viewpoint, and for the NPA to go full defender, it would take a lot of sort of institutional inertia to change, because I think, unlike the South Pacific, the majority of our NPAers are raiders historically, or at least traditionally, and so I mean, it would be a really difficult change, and it would certainly not be a popular one by any means. So there's definitely that.
It would be risky for us. And I mean, like I said, I am a defender. I was part of the ADN. I also saw what the ADN did to GCRs, and I saw what the UDL did to GCRs. And I think that the political machination would be a risk, and is a risk for the South Pacific if they go through with declaring themselves actively defender, versus just if they ban them, if they prohibit themselves from raiding. That's different from declaring themselves a defender. But I think that would open us up to the sort of external interference that we have with in the past and have generally been extremely averse to.
I think the South Pacific opening themselves up to that sort of side of R&D, basically saying, there's a good chance we might go full defender, is actually, I mean, MadJack sort of said it jokingly, but it is a good reason for us to do it ourselves, because it shows that we would have a strong alliance with them, the Aurora Alliance, I believe, and we could use that to our full potential.
Yeah, but it's the South Pacific.
That is a perfectly valid argument.
That's a little too true. It's a little close to the nail.
On the subject of alliances, though, are we using any of our treaties to their full potential? Like, honestly?
We need more favorable tribals.
Like,
honestly, there's so much more that we could be doing with them. That's right.
And that's I don't want to make it seem like it's a problem just with Fiji's admin, because it's not. The thing with treaties, I feel like people have always been inclined to put in stuff like, we'll cooperate on culture, and
well, we've been doing the culture thing in recent treaties. Actually, that is something we've been pushing a little bit more, is that kind of stuff. But yeah,
I mean, that always used to be a thing. It has been for years. Regions where I think used to be better about carrying out the cultural stuff. I mean, certainly a number of our treaties are more flowery words than genuine feeling.
That's not unique to us, though. Let's be fair.
Oh yeah, it's even in the rejected realms. It's no secret. You can see it clearly. But I think the issue or the source of it is that it's, depending on how you look at it, maintaining the treaties is, rather than, or it's specifically to culture, eventually it becomes more like maintenance than fun.
Mm-hmm. And another thing is, in terms of what treaties fundamentally are for, I think they've lost a lot of their purpose with the game and with TNP as it is. I mean, we don't have much cause to rely on other regions for things. We're not plagued with coups anymore. We're not a defender region pledging with other defender regions to protect people who get raided. I mean, we're not actively like imperialists who are making treaties with other regions to agree to help claim territory for each other. We're pretty standalone in terms of day-to-day operations. So treaties, it's hard to come up with a structure where treaties really actually could capture or benefit a relationship, I guess. Like, I mean, we've had a treaty for years and years and years with the South Pacific. Every so often we have a delegacy transition and we call on them and maybe they send someone, or they have a delegacy transition and we send someone there. But by and large, the treaty does nothing. I don't see a way to fix that because we don't need them. And it's not specific to the South Pacific. We don't need most of our allies for much of anything at all.
Well, and I think that's more That's more a matter of the sustainability that the North Pacific's built up now, which it's not a bad thing, and I think every region should aspire to that, but they shouldn't neglect their treaties at the same time. It's just hard not to.
I don't think it's even neglect. It's certainly it's not an intentional, though I guess neglect wouldn't. I don't know. I've had a couple beers.
It's not intentional, but it's happening. It's just hard. It's hard to avoid that.
It's more symbolic than anything's kind of what I'm hearing.
And the other part of it is the way we do get into treaties tends to lead to potential conflicts. I mean, if we were to suddenly declare that we're defender, we'd probably have to cut off the majority of our treaties because we're treated with like independent and imperialist regions who we would no longer be able to be friendly with. Or, if we were to declare ourselves raider, we'd probably have to cut off the treaty with the South Pacific because they would probably not be friendly to us. Whereas where we are right now, we can have treaties with people who don't like each other, and as long as nobody goes to war, we're pretty much okay.
I don't think that's actually necessarily true. I think when it comes to these sort of alliances and whatnot, for the most part, I do see them as being more symbolic in nature, and that it's more of a sort of a commitment for the long term. As a statement back to your point about the North Pacific being really stable, just because that's the case right now doesn't mean it is always going to be that way. And we've certainly seen in the past that there have been coups, that there have been incidents when, we do have to call on our allies for support. And just because we're in a very prosperous period right now doesn't mean that we're always going to be that way. And it would be short-sighted to sort of neglect that possibility. So we have to maintain those alliances in the meantime.
I guess what I meant, I certainly wasn't saying that we should neglect them or that we should, start repealing them and just go it alone. What I meant more was in a situation where, with North Pacific in the past, where it's a lot more vulnerable to being couped, is much more imperative that we actively seek out and maintain relationships. And so I think there's more drive for the government officials serving at that time to reach out to their counterparts in allied regions and to arrange, events or cross-cultural whatever to foster friendship and all those fun terms and the fluffy stuff because survival depends on it. And so when survival no longer depends on it, it becomes less urgent, and so that leads to us having these treaties where we're not really maintaining them because no one's got that drive of like, if I don't do this, I'm risking this region.
One of the things that helps with that, as we mentioned earlier and that MadJack mentioned earlier, was cultural exchanges and whatnot. But the problem with cultural exchanges is that it takes so much effort and so much time to put into that sort of a thing.
Well, isn't it worth the effort?
Of course it is.
Is it?
I'd say so.
Depends on the event.
And the turnout, too.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, sometimes it's hard to get people. I mean, a common thing used to be for regions to host like events on their forum, and they'd make a little sub forum for whatever masquerade ball was going on, and they'd send out invitation to other regions, and like 2 or 3 people from those regions might make an account on the forum and stop in and say hi. But most people aren't going to be going to another region's forum for a week just to chat and such. Mostly they play in their own area. So it is hard to get participation in some of these types of events.
It's definitely hard, and I'm not saying it isn't. But what I am saying is that like the moments that make me happiest in nation states, the moments that make me most proud of the fact that I continue to play this game are when we have successful inter-regional events like that, where we really see that when we come together, we can be strong. And that kind of a thing, like the most recent one that comes to mind was Escade's Harry Potter Festival of Friendship right at the end of last year. That was like one of those times when it really became very apparent to me that this sort of thing is worth it, and we can't stop trying towards that goal.
Absolutely agree, it's worth it.
To go full circle, I think Discord makes those events easier to put on and to actually have participation.
To an extent, yeah. But especially over this year, over the last 2 years, I've seen more of an increase of activities in-game rather than, say, forum side or even on Discord.
I would actually agree with Ghost that it is a lot easier because of Discord. You can just, join someone's Discord server rather than joining their forums or their IRC or whatever it might be. I know that if it wasn't for the ease of access, I certainly wouldn't have been joining in the Rejected Realms werewolf games recently.
Basically, anything that avoids making people create a username and password is going to have a lot more participation than, oh yes, please make an account.
Yeah, exactly.
To be honest, I've never really gotten that either, because it's not a tedious process, but for some reason it does still deter people from joining in.
Yeah, well, I mean, from my perspective, I don't like making accounts that I know I'm going to abandon after a week. I don't like making accounts when I'm forced to. It may be a contrarian streak. And so if I go to a website and it's like, oh, to view what we have to sell, you have to make an account and give us your email. I'm like, nope, I will buy things from elsewhere. Bye.
Generally, I tend to do the same. Like, I don't personally care about making an account in principle, but in practice, it's like
I can hear Bob.
I have better things to do than sit around on your stupid website and make a account that I'm probably never going to use after this. So I'm just going to go to a different site.
I've never been discouraged or bothered by having to register a new account. I registered an account on the Rejected Realms forum, and just because it's obviously more long term, doesn't mean that I'd be less inclined to make an account on a forum I'm not going to see very often or at all afterwards. I occasionally come back to them for another kind of cultural thing, even if it's years later. And it just takes away the future bother of making a new one.
Yeah, but this is the Discord generation, like we were discussing earlier. That I could easily see a lot of people not wanting to do that, or just not wanting to do forums in general. And even if they did,
The
I feel like the
Discord
participation
privilege.
would be lower than it would on Discord.
I'm not Discord generation, and I don't make accounts on, and so like I think it's just a personal thing. Some people just really don't like the effort of making an account, but if you can just give them a microphone and let them talk.
We're bogged down by our Discord privilege now. we get it now.
To say you were a Discord person because you have that position, but I just say that I think it's more likely that people who embrace Discord will also have that position. I think there'll be more overlap, and that's why you'd see less participation if you didn't have it.
To just go back to our treaties for a moment, I think there's another way of looking at them that people haven't been, and it's what do we get out of our treaties?
Huh.
At the moment, we get the benefits of war and the cultural collaboration we've had with Great the Instead. Outside of that, and the MPA being able to deploy to Stargate in recent times.
Yeah, I mean the Stargate Treaty is very much it's not exactly paternalistic,
one-sided
but it's
gang.
a thing for them.
Yeah, but outside of that, what are we getting with, say, the Sacagawea Alliance?
Hey.
I like equalism. I've been there before. Y'all are cool guys, but what do we get from it? What do we get from the treaty with Tajitu or with Albion?
Every so often we say
with equalism, we have a dead channel in the NPA server that's been archived for over 2 years.
You could easily make the argument, and so I will, that we could get rid of almost all of our non-wall treaties, except for Stargate and ones that we actively use to cultivate our cultural scene over here, like Greater the Instead.
Well, and
what do we lose in that sense?
Guarantee of aid if anything does happen to us. I mean, Fiji is not wrong. Things could change.
Well, I think I think we've always relied on the treaties themselves, having to get people to come to our forum or their forum for our cultural activities, when we've had everybody has been not underutilizing our embassies that we can do cultural stuff in and still keep it for foreign updates and stuff. Like I don't know if you guys remember when Wintreath sent out the puzzles that they did into their embassies, and
I recall that.
And some regions had a lot of fun with it, and we could think regions to do more things like that with their embassies, and it could really maintain these treaties without having to bother registering an account on another region's forum.
Yeah,
one of the things.
Sorry, go ahead, Fiji.
No, you go.
I was going to agree and just say, that's one of the things that I'd like to see more people doing. Just the way embassies and ambassadors seem to work, in TMP anyway, is that if you're an ambassador all you're doing is posting updates. Like, I'm aware that within the ministry there is a thing where you're supposed to report on stuff, but as the former ambassador to Great at the Endstead,
Happen.
if I ever bothered to fill that out, it would have been they're RPing. They still exist. They say hi.
So it's funny that Wintreath came up in this discussion because just the other day I was speaking with McMasterdonia specifically about, how should we continue with foreign outreach and, if there are any other, bilateral treaties and agreements we might be interested in pursuing. And, one of the things that I actually spoke about was, specifically Wintreath, because I've had experiences with them in the past. I missed the puzzle thing that happened. So sorry, Praetor, I couldn't have helped you with that. But, the Summer's End Festival is quite great. And something that Wintreath does that a lot of other people don't is that they have a big focus on games and, sort of fun, weird things. I don't think they're really relevant when it comes to gameplay and whatnot, but from a really cultural perspective, they're really fun to hang out with. And that could be something that we can capitalize on. And we could do that with not just them, but other regions as well.
I kind of want to go back to something. I don't think I was able to say this well earlier, but so I think philosophically for me, treaties are best when they are into a relationship with another region. That would be the ideal. Is you find a region you've got something in common with, you do some things together, you cooperate on some stuff, you do more things together, and you end it with saying, okay, well, we seem to get along, great, let's sign a treaty together, and we'll keep doing things that we have in common together. And that's absolutely not how it happens most of the time.
It always petters out after that last part.
Well, it doesn't. From my experience, it isn't even that first stuff. It's more like, hey, we've got some stuff in common. Let's sign a treaty and then see if we want to do stuff together. It's like getting married before you go on a date. And I think that goes back to kind of what I was saying, where a lot of regions don't rely on one another anymore. Whereas, as kind of way back when you had founderless regions who were doing this thing, they genuinely did rely on one another for defenses and things. And so they would, engage in these things and then sign it with a treaty and then keep doing these things. And now it's just like, oh, this region looks cool. Like even Greater Dienstad, where we didn't start with cooperation. We started with treaty, and it turns out this one seems to have panned out from what MadJack is saying, but it's not founded on any real relationship there, which is a disappointment, I think. But I don't know how to fix that, because like, who's gonna throw a cultural event for someone who's not even an ally yet?
Yeah.
I mean, we might.
I understand that. Like, I think a lot of the times we pass treaties without really considering what that's going to look like in 2, 3, 4 years down the line. Like our treaty with the Rejected Realms, it says that in the event of a security issue in another feeder or sinker, we'll inform each other. I think it says notify. We'll notify the other signatory about our stance on the matter, which to me suggests direct communication. I've not been in government whilst said things have gone on in recent times, but I wouldn't know if that's happened. Maybe it has.
Probably hasn't.
But considering who's been in charge of various regions at various points, I'd say maybe it hasn't.
Well, I think it's more, it hasn't happened because there hasn't been a lot of trouble over the last, year and a half or so. So there hasn't really been anything to notify each other about.
But also, that treaty with the Rejected Realms is relatively new in the grand scheme of things. We just got it together last year.
I certainly haven't done any notifying, if that was what you were asking.
But
No,
you've been doing
because
it for like
it's not
a
been
week, buddy.
a security issue in another region, another feeder or sinker in that time.
That's more reliant on one side finding out about a threat before the region that's being threatened, which doesn't happen as often as the treaty would, or that clause in the treaty would substantiate. So
I don't think that clause in the treaty is about discovering a security threat. My impression is it's about like, if Lazarus is cooed, then TNP and TRR are supposed to tell each other, hey, we support the cooers, hey, we support the original government, hey, we're staying neutral, or whatever.
well, that's more done privately, or I mean not publicly than privately. And the first thing that every region does is post their statement on the GP forum. and then everybody finds out, and it still sticks to the clause. It's just not as it's not privately done, which I think is kind of what the clause implies that it should be.
Perhaps. I mean, certainly if we find out about one another's stances, that seems like it does satisfy, if not the intent of the clause, at least the meaning of it.
To back out of the weeds here a little bit and go back to SillyString's earlier point about starting to see that you have something in common with a potential ally and then signing the treaty with them before you really get that sort of thing going. Those sort of treaties are always very optimistic. And the problem with them is that once you get into a position where you have an alliance with a region, like it's at that point just completely symbolic rather than having, any substantive nature. And at that point, it's really difficult to get people going and get people from your region to do cultural activities with other people for all the reasons that we've already explained. As you were saying, it basically has to be something that's already happening, and it's very difficult to turn that around once things are in place. But that's something that we can't stop trying to do.
Once you sign the treaty, you think everybody thinks, we've already got it. We don't need to make this effort anymore, even though we should be making these efforts.
Like I said, treaties are basically marriage, and you just like you should really keep dating each other after you get married, you should really keep doing cultural events after you sign a treaty.
So I guess the main takeaway, at least for me from this entire conversation, is review the alliances that we have and find something special that we share with each of the regions that we're allied to and capitalize on that with either events or, other activities that bring us together on a more standard, typical basis.
Well, isn't that kind of your whole goal running for delegate, Fiji? Wasn't that something you were going to be doing anyway?
It's something that I'm already thinking about doing, but it again takes a lot of effort and is something that actually has been a little bit slower coming about than I had anticipated. I think part of that is due to sort of inexperience in the role that I'm overcoming as I'm learning about what it takes to be delegate in a GCR, but I think we're going to get there eventually.
I think you are just a slacker.
Just the worst speaker.
I concur. The worst speaker this region's ever had. We should motion for a recall immediately. Praetor.
Although, did any of you notice Roman didn't run in May?
Yeah.
I did notice.
Have you noticed he hasn't even been around?
Yeah, literally, he hasn't been on
Shocking.
Discord since.
But he is going to be delegate, so keep that in mind.
Yeah. Okay, well.
If you want to find the things we have in common, and there's a couple of regions like Taiji-2 and Stargate where what we have in common is every so often they are in danger and then we protect them. So clearly what we should do is organize a raid on Stargate just so that we can rush to their defense and show them how much we care.
As a raider, I support this.
I'll rejoin the NPA just to do it.
Yes, let's do it.
Okay, well, it's getting really silly now, so I think that's a sign that we're probably all tuckered out here, and some people want to go to bed, I'm sure. One person in particular should already be sleeping, I think. So
Go to bed,
Yeah,
sleep.
Someone should write
done
an
with finals. Fuck
article
off,
about
MadJack.
Ghost saying all tuckered up.
I said
Yeah.
tuckered out, first of all.
Get
Second of
on
all,
that
whatever.
Get on
You
that
know,
crap.
I got some folksy things I say sometimes, sue me. We all have our vices, I guess. So,
I don't.
yeah, it was a really, really interesting conversation, guys. Thank you for participating. Learned a lot of cool stuff. Really cool having you here, SillyString, in particular. Thanks for jumping in, Fiji and MadJack. I know wasn't the best scheduling, but we got a whole show here. Thanks for trying, Bob, even though you weren't always audible for everybody in the room. But
I don't know what happened.
I'm doing my best. I'm doing my best, man. It's a hard life being.
And thanks, Church of Satan, for agreeing to stop by and share your perspective on these things. Hopefully you'll come back again. Well, it was fun.
Yes, maybe now I finally overcome my verbal conversation phobia.
You and me both, buddy.
Being shy? What's that?
Okay, well, you guys have a good rest of the weekend, and we will do this whole thing again. Thanks for listening to whoever bothered to listen to this and stop by during the live broadcast. Thanks for your input, and we'll see you for the next one.
This has been NBS Radio. Thanks for listening.